Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Sakarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasani Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 22. This is a wonderful purport I like very much for occasions like this, where Srila Prabhupada is writing extensively about the importance of deity worship. And he starts the purport especially for householders. Looks like there's a few householders in the assembly here. So especially for you all, but not only for you all. In this chapter 3, this pure devotional service is the title. The sequence has been 1, 2, 3. Meditation on the universal form, appreciating the Lord in the heart, and then the Bhagavan feature access through bhakti, pure devotional service. And in this section, Shukadeva Goswami is describing the importance of using our senses in the service of the master of the senses. And without using the senses in the service of the master of the senses, the picture is a good picture. The picture is one is wasting the valuable human form of life. So rather than the negative, here's the positive. Text 22. The eyes which do not look at the symbolic representations of the personality of Godhead Vishnu, parentheses, his forms, name, quality, etc., are like those printed on the plumes of the peacock, and the legs which do not move to the holy places where the Lord is remembered are considered to be like tree trunks. Now many of you are familiar with the verse. Some of you are probably familiar with the purport, but it's nice to hear again and again. And again and again. And again and again. That's Prabhupada's purport, especially for the householder devotees. The path of deity worship is strongly recommended. As far as possible, every householder, by the direction of the spiritual master, must install the deity of Vishnu. Forms like Radha Krishna, Lakshmi Narayan, or Sitaram especially, or any other form of the Lord, like Nisringa, Varaha, Gordatai, Matsya, Kurma, Shalagram Shila, and many other forms of Vishnu, like Trivikrama, Keshava, Achyuta, Vasudeva, Narayana, and Damodar, as recommended in the Vaishnava Tantras or Puranas, and one's family should worship strictly following the directions and regulations of Archana Vidhi. There's 2 more pages of purport. Any member of the family who is above 12 years of age should be initiated by a bona fide spiritual master, and All the members of the household should be engaged in the daily service of the Lord, beginning from morning, parentheses, 4 a.m. There's a little dispensation for temples, it's 4:30. Till night, 10 p.m. By performing Mangala Arti, Niranjana, Archana, Puja, Kirtana, Shringara, Bhoga, Vaikali, Sandhya, Arati, Hatha, Bhoga, parentheses, at night, Shayana, Arati, etc. Engagement in such worship of the deity under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master will greatly help the householders to purify their very existence and make rapid progress in spiritual knowledge. We'll circle back of how does deity worship help you develop spiritual knowledge. Simple theoretical book knowledge is not sufficient for a neophyte devotee. Book knowledge is theoretical, whereas the Archana process is practical. Spiritual knowledge must be developed by a combination of theoretical and practical knowledge, and that is the guaranteed way for attainment of spiritual perfection. The training of devotional service for a neophyte devotee completely depends on the expert spiritual master who knows how to lead his disciple to make gradual progress towards the path back home, back to Godhead. One should not become a pseudo-spiritual master as a matter of business to meet one's family expenditures, semicolon. One must be an expert spiritual master to deliver the disciple from the clutches of impending death. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has defined the bona fide qualities of a spiritual master, and one of the verses in that description reads, you want to guess which one? Shri Vigraharadhan Tirana Shringaratham Mandiram Yatasya Bhaktam Chaniyantatopi Vande Guru Sri Charanarundam. Shri Vigraha is the archa, or suitable worshipable form for the Lord. And the disciple should be engaged in worshiping the deity regularly by Shringara, by proper decoration and dressing, as also by Mandira Marjana, the matter of cleansing the temple. The spiritual master teaches the neophyte devotee all these kindly and personally to help him gradually in the realization of the transcendental name, quality, form, etc. of the Lord. Paragraph. It's a long one, final paragraph. Only attention engaged in the service of the Lord, especially in dressing and decorating the temple, accompanied by musical kirtan and spiritual instructions from scriptures, can save the common man from the hellish cinema attractions and rubbish sex songs broadcast everywhere by radios, and now even better media than radios. If one is unable to maintain a temple at home, he should go to another's temple, where all the above performances are regularly executed. Visiting the temple of a devotee and looking at the profusely decorated forms of the Lord, well dressed in a well-decorated, sanctified temple, naturally infuse the mundane mind with spiritual inspiration. people should visit holy places like Vrindavan or such temples, and worship of the deity are specifically maintained. Formerly, all rich men like kings and rich merchants constructed such temples under the direction of expert devotees of the Lord, like the six Goswamis. And it is the duty of the common man to take advantage of these temples and festivals observed in the holy places of pilgrimage by following in the footsteps of great devotees. Anu Vraja, one word, Anu Vraja. One should not visit all these sanctified pilgrimage places and temples with sightseeing in mind, but one must go to such temples and sanctified places immortalized by the transcendental pastimes of the Lord and be guided by proper men who know the science. This is called Anu Vraja. Anu means to follow, and there it is therefore best to follow the instruction of this bona fide spiritual master, even in visiting temples and the holy places of pilgrimage. One who does not move in that way is as good as a standing tree, condemned by the Lord not to move. The moving tendency of the human being is misused by visiting places for sightseeing. The best purpose of such traveling tendencies could be fulfilled by visiting the holy places established by great acharyas, and thereby not being misled by the atheistic propaganda of money-making men who have no knowledge of spiritual matters. It's a long report, but filled with nice instructions, specifically the seeing of the deity form and using one's legs to go to such places where deity forms are established. And he's covering both homes and holy places. There's a vast section even in the Karma Kanda portions of the Vedas, but otherwise also in the Puranas, vast portions of descriptions of the benefits of visiting tirthas, which means temples, and vast description of the benefits that come, and sins can be eradicated, one's spiritual life becomes awakened, and so forth and so on. However, in connection with when our acharyas describe that aspect of the Vedas, they add this important conclusion that what is accomplished by visiting all those holy places is very simply accomplished by chanting of the holy name. And therefore, when worshiping deities in your home or in the temple or anywhere, important is to accompany the worship of the deity with kirtan. Why? Because it's pleasing to the deity. All the other activities in deity worship, they're meant for pleasing the deity form of the Lord. The bathing, and the dressing, and the ornamenting, and garlanding, and decorations, and all of that. There's a practical effect that's mentioned here in the purport. It infuses the minds of those who see the deity nicely decorated. It infuses the mind with what? With appreciation of the form and appreciation of the devotion with which the form of the Lord in the deity feature is being worshipped. And that decoration of the deity can be simple, or it can be not so simple, very elaborate. just like, because Radhastami passed recently, many of you probably saw, I didn't ask, many people sent me photos of the deities in Vrindavan on Radhastami. And breathtaking. No, it wasn't in Vrindavan, but the photographers were, and distributing pictures of the deity form of Srimati Radharani on Radhastami Day. Knockout. So one becomes attracted to the form of the deity and the devotion of the worshippers of the deity form. So it's two things. So the Vaishnavas and the bhakti carried by the Vaishnavas being displayed externally in the way that they have decorated the deities so nicely. And then, of course, in Vrindavan, but the same in principle anywhere, is chanting before the deity, having kirtan. Because I'm going to Udupi, I thought to share this with you. From the Madhvacharya made big emphasis, along with, Lord Vishnu is the only independent entity, and all others are dependent entities, and they're different than independent and dependent. This philosophy is very strong, very clear. At the same time, very strong and clear was his emphasis on deity worship. And the emphasis upon deity worship was a replacement of what was going on prior to him. Because what was going on prior to him was kind of poo-poo the deity worship. Or for those who were weak-minded, then the Pancha-Upasana, they had a different term for it at that time, Shankaracharya. But, any deity form is fine because in the ultimate issue, absolute truth is nirguna. But if those of you that like forms, then you can worship any one of these five, and it'll help you get to the nirguna conception of the absolute truth. And so there was an abundance of different, not only the five, but different because of cultural affinity, and heredity, and different groups of people liking this and that and the other thing. But he met that challenge by philosophy and then by deity worship. And just many of you know, some of you may not know, but he had one day, because he was, for some period of time, he was a sannyasi, so he traveled much. For one period of time, he was in Udupi, before there was Udupi Krishna, and one of the things that he did on a regular basis was go to the sea to take his bath in the sea. So on one particular day, Super Soul inspired, and he began spontaneously in Sanskrit composing a whole 46 prayers to glorify Krishna. His biography describes that he felt in his heart some anticipation that Krishna was going to come. And Krishna came in his deity form. And the circumstance, many of you know the circumstance, as he reached the sea at a particular location, it's quite a distance from where Udupi is, where he went to go to the sea. And he looked out into the sea and he saw a ship that got stuck on a sandbar out at sea. And being compassionate and inspired by Super Soul, he waved his handkerchief. And he waved his handkerchief. The ship was dislodged from sand dune or sandbar. And then he motioned for the captain of the ship to come to the shore, so that the ship came to the shore. the captain of the ship, it was a cargo ship, and he descended from the cargo ship, and because he had seen Madhvacharya motioning for the ship to move off the sandbar, and he wanted to do something out of reciprocation for the miraculous waving this handkerchief that moved the ship from the sandbar. So he said, I don't need much, but do you have some ballast in your ship? So ballast means merchant ships or other ships, they put something really heavy at the bottom because it helps keep the boat from tilting in the waves and the movements of the water. So they had very large chunks of gopi chandan in the hull of the ship for ballast. And he asked, can I have those? Really heavy. So it's a long story, but 30 men couldn't pick up those chunks of gopi chandan. He went into the hull of the ship with his own 2 arms. He picked up the gopi chandan and carried it to the shore. And the captain was like, who's this person? And as he was walking with the gopi chandan in his 2 arms, it broke. And when it broke, there were 3 deities inside the gopi chandan. And one of those deities would be Krishna. And then my plan is on Tuesday evening to speak something about the Balaram deity, to show you some pictures of the Balaram deity, because the Udupi Krishna deity is very well known. Anyway, and he established a temple in that first place where the Balaram deity came out, enough that he just had the deity washed of the Gopi Chandan, was cleared, and he established a temple there. And then he brought the Udupi Krishna deity back to Udupi, because he wasn't Udupi Krishna then. There's a long, long history. These are very, very ancient deities that were worshipped in Dwaraka shortly after Krishna's time. Because shortly after Krishna's time, Dwaraka disappeared. But that's the history, or perhaps during Krishna's time. Anyways, the deity of Krishna was from Dwaraka. And his childlike form, holding items that a child will hold. And so he established the importance of deity worship by his own example. And these prayers that he had composed, this very nice, wonderful history. These prayers that he had composed, he had his disciples recite those prayers as he personally worshipped Udupi Krishna every day. So they're outside the worship area reciting prayers while he's worshiping the deity. And then because there's 46 of them and they're long, so they would only recite 3 or 4 of them, and then the next day another 3 or 4 of them, and the next day 3 or 4 of them. Really interesting. One day, he didn't come out of the temple room. And they had finished their recitation of their prayers for the day. And time passed, and time passed, and time passed, and time passed. And they started to get anxiety. Maybe he had a medical problem or something like that. So they approached the senior-most member in their midst to go see, is he okay? So he took the liberty, a little reluctant to do so, but he opened the deity door to see, is he okay? And what he saw, this is according to his biography, he saw Hanuman worshipping Ram, Bhima worshipping Krishna, and Madhvacharya worshipping Vyasadeva. That's why it was taking so long. And he closed the door. And after that experience, this great Acharya, Trivikram Pandit Acharya was his name, he composed 4 stanzas in glorification of Vayu, because Hanuman, Bhima, and Madhvacharya are manifestations of Vayu. So it's a whole series of prayers. And he showed the series of prayers to Madhvacharya for his approval. Interesting. And Madhvacharya said, this isn't appropriate. You have to make an introductory set of verses glorifying the nails of Lord Nrsimhadev. And so he did. And then Madhvacharya approved. That became a celebrated piece of literature in the Madhva Sampradaya. Back to deity worship. Madhvacharya made strong emphasis on the importance of deity worship, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted initiation in the line of Madhvacharya for many reasons, and this is one of those reasons, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also established by his own teaching as well as his example the importance of deity worship. And then following the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, similarly, with the exception of Raghunath Bhatta, whose deity was Srimad Bhagavatam, the other 5 of the 6 Goswamis, they established deity worship. And what platform of Krishna consciousness were they? They were householders. They were the topmost platform of Krishna consciousness. And not simply to set an example, but it was certainly example setting to this day in Vrindavan, or where those deities are now situated. Deity worship is very, very, very important in our line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So emphasis is being placed in this purport for, especially for householders, but the importance of deity worship. Just a little sharing. Prabhupada also established, he did it in sequence. The first, it was called Guru Varanga altar. Guru Varanga altar meant he engaged some of his disciples who were interested in art, kind of rudimentary. They weren't really artists, but they were becoming artists. So he had them, all of them, or some of them rather, some painted paintings for his books, and others were engaged in making original artwork, paintings of the Panchatattva. Then a photograph of Prabhupada's, it was called the Guru Varanga altar, and that's how temple worship started. So offerings were made to the Guru Varanga altar in temples. And then after some time, when the devotees were a little more qualified, the painting was placed by the side of the altar or somewhere in the temple room, and then they were replaced with deities of Bordatai often, or other deities. And so in sequence, Prabhupada was gradually introducing his followers to deity worship in temples, and then of course came deity worship in homes, because not everybody could easily access a temple, or like for example in Los Angeles, because of, by that time, the Los Angeles temple had many householders, and the second canto was available, and so there was emphasis on deity worship in homes. And then came this tussle about deity worship at home versus deity worship in the temple. There's always got to be a controversy, right? So it's not new, there's still controversy. So what's important? Just like one of the questions answered yesterday was, supposing I have one discretionary hour, should I read Prabhupada's books, or should I hear the recordings of Prabhupada, or should I listen to the recordings of my spiritual master? Dilemma. So the answer is you do all of them. So the emphasis that Prabhupada gave is the worship of the temple in the deity in the temple should not be compromised. So that when there's sufficient brahmanas in a community, they can do both. That's ideal. Every day worship in their home if they have deities, and from time to time in a scheduled way to take responsibility for the worship of the deity. And standards in temple worship are stricter than standards of worship in the home. And standards of worship of Radha and Krishna are more strict than Gauratai and Jagannath deity worship. So but it's not just, I want them more strict, there's inclination. There's a very nice verse. I don't know where, 11th canto. I think it's chapter 3, 11th canto, chapter 3, where one should worship the deity form that one has the greatest attraction for. And one should chant the name that one has the greatest attraction for. It doesn't mean you don't chant other names, but there's a particular Sanskrit term for the deity for which you have the greatest attraction. And you worship there. But coming back around to this point of what's important in deity worship, there's two things that Prabhupada emphasized, and then you can add additional things to what Prabhupada emphasized. That is punctuality and cleanliness, whether it's in your home or in the temple. Punctuality and cleanliness, like this morning's deity installation was not punctual. But if you set a time, then be punctual, because it's not for our convenience, it's about the deity. So anyway, aside from that little comment, punctuality and cleanliness. And then one additional item is chanting. You chanting japa, or even more kirtan. And the purpose of kirtan before the deity is for the pleasure of the deity. I was thinking to make that comment yesterday, but I didn't. That nice devotee goes leading kirtan. There's nice kirtan, and then there's the devotion for the pleasure of the deity to have nice kirtan. That makes it ut kirtan. Very special. You like playing with Tonka? Yes, I know. And is there a quality? The answer is yes. Is there a qualitative difference between playing, mridanga or any musical instrument, or singing or something, where the consciousness behind the activity is for the pleasure of the deity, or the consciousness is the proficiency in the musical performance? And there's a world of difference. No, proficiency in musical performance is nice. It's for the pleasure of the deity. So deity worship means, and bhakti means placing the satisfaction of the personality of Godhead in the front, and everything else follows that one. Deity worship is like that. And devotional life is like that. Here's one Prabhupada saying. This is back to, because the Boston temple that I moved into was a place where it was ISKCON Press at that time, and the three principal artists, along with the others that were making the Panchatattva paintings, were living in this single-family residential building packed up together. So the devotees asked, the artists asked Prabhupada, should we take art lessons? Because many of them, before they started painting for Prabhupada's book, they hadn't had a brush in their hand. And Prabhupada said, no. No, they took art lessons. But he said, Lord Brahma has made this body in such a way that if you practice at something, you'll get in devotion to him, in devotion to Krishna, then the quality will come to you. Now, I don't recommend that you can't take mridanga lessons. But if you take mridanga lessons, it's not about proficiency of musical skill. It can be. It can be reduced to something on the material platform. And there's proficiency in musical skill, for sure. but it's a whole other thing. And that's the same with deity worship. The passages here, I'll read it. He gives all these, this and that, the other thing, deity worship. Engagement in such worship of the deity under direction of a bona fide spiritual master will help the householders to purify their existence and make rapid progress in spiritual knowledge. What does that mean? Because supposing you do deity worship and you don't read Prabhupada's books, or a disproportionate amount of worship and not sufficient amount of reading Prabhupada's books, that's not what's recommended. However, the bhakti process is such that innate knowledge that's within becomes awakened to the process of bhakti. Say it again. The bhakti process is such that knowledge of detachment causes the arise from bhakti. Knowledge isn't book knowledge. Knowledge is, as Prabhupada is saying here, practical. Deity worship is practical because then the heart, if one does deity worship with bhakti, then this heart becomes cleansed, and then the knowledge that's within becomes realized. Realize the form of the Lord. And my life, my senses, my existence is to please the deity form of the Lord. And then what happens? There's reciprocation. How are we doing with the dressing of deity? Can you get any indication? It's like we're talking for a while. I'd like to move on. When Prabhupada installed Rukmini Dwarkadish in Los Angeles, one of the expressions he shared at that deity installation was, one should worship the deity received through the spiritual master mercy and Krishna's mercy with such devotion that one day Krishna will say to you, I am like this. That's realized knowledge. We can read about it, and then we can hear it directly from Krishna. I am like this. You please me very much. Let me reveal myself to you. I am like this. No, that takes a very advanced person, and to invoke the mercy of the deity to reveal to the devotee, I am like this. But that's bhakti. I'm going to share one other thing, because this is Radha Krishna home worship. There's a devotee couple, I won't say where, one temple somewhere. And I was visiting their home, and I asked them, particularly the wife was engaged in full-time deity worship for her deity, Radha Krishna deities. And I asked you, do you sometimes worship the deity in the temple? And her reply, she was reserved. And she said, no, softly. I said, there's some reason that you don't, because you have Radha Krishna deities in the temple. You have Radha Krishna deities in your home that sometimes worship the deity in the temple. She looked at her husband. Her husband nodded, like, it's okay, you can tell. She said, for this many years, I've been performing 7 artis and 7 offerings every day, just like in the temple. So I don't know what she did when she was, undergoing her menstrual cycle. I don't know what the practice was. Maybe he took over when that was the case. But for many years, something like 12, 13 years, 7 times a day. So I don't have time. That was her vrata. She just didn't have time to do anything other than that for the deity in the temple. Then I said, you must have some realizations. And shared, like Prabhupada said, one day the deity will say to you, I am like this? She looked at her husband nodded, so she shared. She said, I have this practice when I make the offerings. I place Krishna's flute to the side, make the offering, and after the offering is removed, I place Krishna's flute back in his hand. And on 2 occasions, I couldn't find the flute. And I always put it in the same place. And you're very disciplined about putting it back in his hand. So then I looked at the deity, and the flute was back in his hand. She smiled, she looked at her husband, he smiled. There's reciprocation, that the deity form is Krishna. It's not just, its deity form is a deity form, and the deity form is Krishna, just like the name and Krishna are the same. But how many of us have that realization or reciprocation? It takes purity, and it takes mercy. So that's possible. How are we doing? Stop. 25 more minutes. Okay. A little bit more and we'll have some discussion. The nice Prabhupada stories about, or stories about deity worship. Some time ago, many temples in America were observing the 50th in London, the 50th anniversary of establishing Radha London Ishwara, big festival, etc. For Radha Govinda in New York and for Rukmini Dwarkadish in LA. So I participated in the one for Kishore Kishori in Chicago. And much to my surprise, and happiness, Urmila Mataji. Some of you may know Urmila. If you get a chance to invite her here to Singapore, you'll hit a home run because she's really very learned and very well composed personality. So she shared when we had this, glorifications of the deity, the histories of different devotees with the deity. She shared something that struck. She shared that she grew up in a Jewish family, kind of Orthodox Jewish family, and Orthodox Jewish people have this view that deity worship is like not to be done, strong. Like you do not worship the deity form of God. It's a no-no, it's a big no-no. And so she shared that when she first visited the Chicago temple, it just happened to be the deity installation day, which meant 50 years before we had this little ceremony. And when she saw it, because she had visited ISKCON, no, she hadn't visited ISKCON centers, but because she was in the back, she was a lady, she couldn't see too much of what was going on, and it didn't strike her. But later, because the deity of Kishore Kishori is so large, she saw very clearly the deity form, and she had an existential crisis about it. Because she was raised, this is a no-no, and here it is, yes, yes. So how to process? It was deeply ingrained in her from childhood. So she started praying, because she had read Prabhupada's books, and she had faith in Prabhupada and Prabhupada's the teachings in his books. So that was her ballast. But then she had this crisis about the deity worship. And then she didn't go into detail, but one fine day, when coming before the deity, it was like the curtain was pulled back. And she had this realization that the deity is not just a deity, but it's a person. And that experience was still with her, and as she was speaking, she kind of got emotional. Normally she doesn't get so emotional, she's a very strong person. But that's what she shares. You know, being a Vaishnavi in ISKCON these days is not an easy thing, especially when you have some scholarship, scholastic ability, and she's been through a lot. But you know, the ballast that kept her going was Prabhupada's books and Kishore Kishori. This experience of he or they are persons, ready to hear our prayers, to accept our worship, to accept our service. And that's not where it begins. It begins with Vintis. But Krishna may, as he did with her case or with others, they have, like this lady that was worshipping Radha Krishna deities at her home, some reciprocation that's very, very special. And it has everything to do with the devotion and the heart of the worshiper. So it can stay on the Vinti, but it can become more in the Radha platform, depending upon the sincerity of the devotee. And it's not to be imitated or even anticipated, but it may come. One day, the deity may speak to you and say, I'm like this. Maybe not. But maybe. And at least in principle, with faith, that the deity form, just like the holy name, just like the Bhagavatam, all three of them, the holy place, they're not different than Krishna. We're to speak of that number 5, which is Vaishnava Seva, because the Vaishnavas are representatives of Krishna. They're not Krishna, but they're representatives of Krishna, and thus dear to Krishna, they should be respected. So that's our life of devotion and deity worship, as we heard from this purport, very important, to help us advance in spiritual knowledge, along with reading Prabhupada's books, and distributing Prabhupada's books, and chanting of the holy name, and serving the Vaishnavas. And when opportunity comes, visit holy places. Okay, so that's 18 more minutes before the deities appear. We'll see if that's really a fact. See if there's some discussion. Deity worship topics, please. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, I wanted to ask, you had mentioned that if we worship the deities and don't read the books, that point that you had raised, that's not very good. So I wanted to ask if a devotee is inclined to do one aspect of seva and not so inclined towards another aspect of seva. Okay, but would, I mean, they are doing everything just because they have. But would they actually get more interested in the other aspect because of the fact that they're, okay.
Let me, here's a little Prabhupada story. For a period of time, for many, many years as a brahmachari, my life, my service was my life. And my service in my life was focused on book distribution because Prabhupada made such strong emphasis on book distribution. So there were 4 of us. I can recite the names, but they won't mean anything to you. There were 4 Prabhupada disciples, young men, in a van. You know, in a Kamaline van, and we loaded it up with books. And we went around to colleges distributing books at colleges. And whenever we ran out of books, they would send an air container and we'd fill up the van. And we did this for a while, and then the little light went on saying, maybe we should have a deity. So a letter was written to Prabhupada, should we have a deity with our traveling Sankirtan, because the emphasis he gave. And then his answer was very short and sweet. He said, let the books be your deity. And so we just accepted because that's what Prabhupada said. Then I was thinking, it's a little strange. When we get the air container, there's booked right up to the ceiling. And because we were squinting and saving, we didn't stay in hotel rooms or motel rooms. We stayed in the van, year round. Even when it was cold, just got here. So here we are sleeping on our deity, the boxes of books. It didn't seem right. But that was our deity. The books are your deity. So in the course of my devotional service, this is personal, but I haven't done so much deity worship. Very little. As a sannyasi, I've contemplated it. Now, maybe now is the time, etc. But that brahmachari training is so ingrained. The books are my deity. So it's okay. Prabhupada authorized, it's okay. You don't need deity. You don't have to have deity. But we were brahmacharis and living in a van. Now I'm not a brahmachari and I'm not living in a van, but the books are my deity from that training. And I don't feel I'm like handicapped because of it. The direct worship, touching, bathing, dressing. So I do it like this. I've installed so many deities. Okay. Yes.
Krishna,
And it's just one other thing. We can flip around the other way. That is to say, I know some people that they so focus on deity worship they haven't sufficiently read Prabhupada's books. And now, or be engaged in management, they didn't sufficiently read Prabhupada's books. I won't name the names. But now, because in their mature stage, they're starting to read Prabhupada's books. And because of that, years and years and years, when they read Prabhupada's books, they get quick realization. The fast lane, the fire ignites just by reading. Whereas those who may not have had that years and years and years of sacrifice, it may take longer. But it has its benefit. Yes. Oh, you have? Okay.
Maharaj, I have a question on offenses when we are doing deity worship. When I first started reading the Bhagavatam or doing any service for you, I didn't have that hesitation that I will make some mistake and it will be an offense. But when it comes to deity worship, both me and my wife, we feel hesitation because we feel we'll make some mistake. We feel fundamentally we don't have the Brahminical qualities. How do we get over this?
Get the qualities. How do you get qualities? You go to Kmart. They're not for sale. Qualities come from bhakti. Visyasti bhakti, bhagavati, kinchana, etc. So by bhakti qualities come. And become familiar, two additional things. Become familiar with what offenses really are. And accidental mistake. The pujaris have told me when dressing the deities sometimes they use pins to place dresses and the pin touches, the point of the pin touches the body of the deity. So be careful. But accidental in the course of service is not the same as deliberate. Offenses, specifically the etymology of the Sanskrit word, has everything to do with intention. So when your intention is right, and even there's some discrepancy or mistake or whatever, you're covered because of bhakti. Then you do some course correction, but you don't not do something because there may be offense involved. Don't chant because, or don't have association with devotees because there might be some offense. It has everything to do with intention. Bhakti has everything to do with, and offense has everything to do with intention. And you get to the, try to get yourself, you and your wife, get to the point where you feel Bhakti is protecting me, and although I don't have all the qualifications needed to worship the deity from the Lord, I don't have all the qualifications necessary to chant the holy name of the Lord either. But it's purification, so let me take this up in that mood. Being cautious about offense and continue going forward. And read nice purports like this because it will help you advance in spiritual knowledge. Follow the vidis and do the do's and avoid the do-nots to your capacity. And Krishna will recognize your sincerity or your intention, and he'll correct you. Needed. You have something?
A question.
You have another question? Okay. Go ahead.
Maharaj, you had mentioned proficiency, and the desire should be to please Krishna rather than to obtain proficiency in a service. But
But
my question was, how are we going to get the purity if we don't have proficiency in basic things like chanting?
did you attend class last night?
No.
Oh. There's no material qualification for devotional service. Prahlad Maharaj states it specifically in the verses of we discussed yesterday, chapter 5, canto 7. So supposing you don't have proficiency, because that's a material qualification.
Even in chanting?
Even in anything. Doesn't mean you don't try for it, but if you try for it, it's not material. Or if you try for proficiency on a material platform, that's not what proficiency is, or it's not the decoration that will please Krishna. But there are decorations that will please Krishna. It's like, Krishna has a big warehouse. He has a good qualities warehouse, and it's loaded. There's no limit to what's in his good quality warehouse. And when Krishna wants to see that you and me and any one of us, that we want to please him, that's bhakti. And if bhakti is there, what does Krishna do? He starts to decorate his devotee from his big warehouse with good quality, efficiency included. And then when Krishna sees his devotee decorated with that nice quality smiles, that it's his quality. So the devotee should be proud. I now have proficiency to be a good mridanga player. Or I now have the proficiency to decorate the deity very nicely, or to cook very nicely, or to sing very nicely, or to dance very nicely, or to do anything very nice. Proficiency is not the standard for what pleases Krishna. He is ready to give all kinds of qualities. Capabilities, deficiencies. He's ready. So what's important for us as devotees is the consciousness that Krishna is to be pleased. Supposing one doesn't have that consciousness, is it possible to become a good mridanga player? Definitely possible to become a good mridanga, very proficient mridanga player without bhakti. Get a good teacher, learn from a good teacher, practice and practice and practice. You can become a really spiffy mridanga player without bhakti. And it's not satisfying to the performer and nor to the experience of the audience. Okay?
Yes, Maharaj. Yeah. But shouldn't we try to chant as best as we can and
Yeah,
try to do?
you don't become numb. That was one of the questions yesterday. Just wait till Krishna's mercy comes. After all, it's not my own effort, it's Krishna's mercy, so just wait till Krishna's mercy comes. That was in our body, mind, spirit complacency. Don't be complacent. But don't think yourself the doer either. I'm creating this good qualification because I have a good teacher, I practice a lot. And, I'm a spiffy renewal. Or, on renewal things, but in principle. How are we doing with the thing? You ready?
No, just checking. Check.
Please check. 5 minutes, okay. That's it, right on time. One more question. You have a question?
But sometimes when we get a new service, then we involve with heart, and later it become as a kind of rules and regulation and just working with the only with mindset, and there is no heart is involved. And similar for like for deity worship, like initially we are enthusiastic and we are seeing we give the importance, but later on once it become as a mechanical process, so we are not involving our heart, it's just working as a head process.
You're making a statement, what's the question?
So how to
How to? Oh,
get ready like we did
I have a flashcard. Here's my flashcard. Sadhu Sangha.
Yes. Like for today Abhishek, we also we need to finish within half an hour time, and then we are just doing but
To stay on track with devotion as opposed to mechanical. You're doing something, deity worship or something, we're done playing or something, because it's in the devotional arena. At least that's where it starts, because that's your point, that's where it starts. Now, how do I stay on track with the devotional mode, rather than becoming complacent and become mechanical? Because that's easy. Default is mechanical chanting, mechanical anything. So how to stay in the devotional mood? So, the way that I'm starting, here's this opportunity for some new. So it's Sadhu Sangha. And then, and Sadhu Sangha means Vajra Kriya. What's Vajra Kriya? You're hearing in the association of devotees. It's, let's say, reading Prabhupada's books that ignited the bhakti that wanted you to get to the point of doing deity worship, or playing Mridanga, or cooking in the kitchen, or something. So it's Sadhu Sangha. And with sadhus you do it with sadhus, what sadhus do. Vajra Kriya. And when that takes place, attentively, is a nice adverb, attentively or sincerely, then Narja Nivritti. That's the obstacle, is the anarthas, the accumulation of unwanted stuff. So we start sincere, and then we get complacent. That's an anartha. It's one of the categories of anarthas. So how do you get rid of anarthas? Stay in good sadhu sangha, do a nice bhajana kriya, and be, in that association, get back on the sincerity track. There's a higher purpose than just becoming proficient at it. Fill in the blank. Okay, I think we should end. And just sharing, if you ever have an event like this in your home, especially if you're in an apartment, notify the neighbors ahead of time. Because while we're having kirtan, I was thinking, we might get a knock on the door from the police. And sure enough, he didn't inform the neighbors. We were having this robust kirtan, and somebody, I'm surprised. And it doesn't like we're breaking the law. It's just, just a disturbance in noise level. They come in and see what this was. We got a problem. So if you ever have the opportunity to install a deity in your home, inform your neighbors, or whatever you need to do, and then just lock the door. But, you know, be conscious of how the sound and the activities are impacting others, because it could be a problem. Shri Prabhupada ki
Jai.
So let's get the table set up and everything ready. Can we do that?
I'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, but inside out.
Sorry.